One of the purposes of my teaching this course, one of my purposes of teaching all of my courses, is to get students to start thinking completely differently. In other words, you've noticed perhaps that one of the things I stress in my lectures is how odd the ancient world is, even how odd early Christianity is from what most of us tend to come at it. This is because I teach New Testament studies and the history of early Christianity almost like ethnography. I try to get you to imagine yourself coming into a culture that's really different from the culture you grew up in. Because this is something I think is basic to religious studies as a discipline. And religious studies teaches you to look at some kind of group of people or an activity or a belief structure that seems to you initially absolutely bizarre. And you think, how could any rational person do that? How could any rational person believe that? And to keep looking at it seriously and to look at it with enough sympathy that you actually can see eventually how it is perfectly rational. And this document today is a great place to illustrate that. Because whenever I teach this document to people your age, 18 to 22-year-old college students, if you read this carefully and you get into this stuff, it should be bizarre to you. This document depicts young people who are attracted to a version of Christianity that forbids having sex entirely. It's completely ascetic. Paul in the Acts of Paul and Thecla says, if you have sex, you're probably not going to go to heaven. Basically, the gospel message in this document is continence, by which this document means avoiding sex. Now, that's going to be bizarre enough because people in the modern world kind of have the idea, well, why would somebody join any movement that forbade sexual intimacy entirely? What kind of draw did that have for people? Why did that gospel succeed? And what may be surprising to you is it did succeed. In the ancient world, a lot of people, especially it seems sometimes even young people, were drawn to early Christianity precisely because it was ascetic. It taught this radical asceticism of watching what you eat, and especially avoiding sex. Or if not avoiding sex entirely, severely limiting sexual intercourse and sexual attraction. So what is it about the ancient culture? What is it about these people that caused them not only to be converted to Christianity, but to be converted especially to a form of it that was radically ascetic? And in order to see why that kind of Christianity was, because that's the actual kind of Christianity that was successful in the ancient world. If you were listening to most modern American Christians, modern American people generally, what are the two most important teachings about Christianity in the minds of most Americans? The family, right? The importance of the family, and by that they mean the heterosexual nuclear family. But even the liberal churches, which are willing to recognize gay relationships, they still construe that as gay marriage or just gay versions of the nuclear family. So the family is the most important thing about Christianity in the minds of a lot of Americans. The second thing is nationalism, patriotism. If you took away patriotism and nationalism and the family out of Christianity, most people in the modern America wouldn't recognize it as such. What's odd is that when you read these ancient documents, that's precisely the two things that Christianity attacks. This form of early Christianity was anti-family for the most part, and it was anti-patriotic. So and that was also people who say, but this is traditional Christianity. Those people don't know their history before 1950. Because the church, the overall Christian churches, were never pro-family for the first 1,500 years of its existence. The Roman Catholic Church, up until the Reformation, always had as its official position, not just popular ideas, its official position was celibacy is superior to sexuality. If you have to have sex, if you can't control yourself, you're allowed to get married and have sex within the bounds of marriage. But the better thing, the better virtue would be to avoid sex entirely for your entire life. The next best thing is to have sex if you need to just to make babies, but then as soon as you have your babies, stop having sex and be ascetic the rest of your life. If your spouse dies, you are permitted to get remarried most of the time, But the higher virtue would be in remaining unmarried and remaining celibate for the rest of your life. That was considered the doctrine in Christianity, at least up until the Reformation, so the 16th century. So when people talk about traditional family values being traditionally the Christian way, they're not talking about Christianity as it existed from the time of Jesus all the way up until around 1600. And even then, from 1600 until 1950, the ideal form in most Christianity was not the nuclear family, but some kind of household. So in Puritan New England, people didn't live in little nuclear families. Townships, the New Haven colony, the Massachusetts Bay colony, they were organized into households that were run by the head of the male head of household, his wife under him, children under that, servants, and other free people often living in the household also, or connected to the household. If you were, for example, an adult male, 25 years old, in New England, in Puritan New England, and you weren't married, you weren't really supposed to live alone or with other men. That happened sometimes, but the town fathers and these colonies were ruled as communities, not individual people. The town fathers would want to put you into somebody else's household, into the household of another man. They certainly wouldn't let adult women live separately. So notice, this is not individualism in the modern sense, and it's not the nuclear family in the modern sense. These are extended family households. That was the New England Protestant way. When did the idea that the dominant form of the best form of the family was the nuclear family come about in popular culture overall? The 1950s. So when people talk about that being the Christian thing, they're forgetting the vast sweep of Christian history. They're just ignoring it. And this document is a good place to see why that made sense for people, especially in the ancient world. And to make it sense for the Middle Ages and all the rest of the time, you'll have to take another course.